Hey YouTube family, it's your girl Mrs. Rains. I'm back with another video. As you can tell, it is a sermon notes video. I know it's long awaited and a little overdue, but we have a couple of things to cover. So the first video I'm going to share with you is this one, and then right after this one I'm going to go ahead and upload a second video about what's going on with King David. So when I left you, we were speaking about King David in 2 Samuel chapter 11, and we were talking about Bathsheba and his encounter with her as she bathed on the rooftop in the village, kind of close to where he could see her from his rooftop. He sent for her. The Lord gave him the word that, hey, that's not what you want. David did it anyway, and we're left with quite a bit of an aftermath and a stir up. So I'm going to refer to my notes here and talk to you now about 2 Samuel chapter 11, and we're talking verses 6 through 27. Now keep in mind, you know, our verse that we kind of been referring back and forth to throughout this chapter is Leviticus 20:10, and it really just describes the law concerning adultery as it pertained to the Israelites back from way long ago when they were Hebrews and they were, you know, traveling around. This is the law that was handed down, and it was that anyone caught in adultery, whether it be the man or the woman, is subject to death. And David has now encountered this thing right in his household. He has now committed adultery with Bathsheba, who was Uriah's wife. So now he's got to start the cover-up. And what I mean by that is David sends for Uriah. Uriah comes to his house. He feeds him. He has a good time. And then he says, hey, go home to your wife. Uriah doesn't bite. He's like, I'm not doing it. I'm just going to make a little mat out here with your servants, and I'm going to sleep out here in the front of the palace. So even though David tried to send him on his merry way, Uriah, even with him being fresh from the battlefield, refused to go home to his wife because he said, hey, why should I be able to go home to my wife? I should be out in the battlefield with the other soldiers. So here David has a dilemma. Uriah is actually more upright than David is at this time, so he's concerned, how am I going to get this guy to go home? So he sends for him a second time, and then this time he decides he's going to get him drunk. He tries to get Uriah drunk. He, you know, tries to get him under the influence so he can go home and sleep with his own wife, and he can try to cover up the fact that he's now impregnated Bathsheba, who is Uriah's wife. And still Uriah's like, nope, I'm not going to do it. He sleeps on the steps yet again the next day. So now David's like, what do I do? Now, originally he was just trying to cover it up with, you know, Uriah sleeping with his own wife and her pregnancy being blamed on Uriah, but that's not working. So now things get more sinister. David decides to take things into his own hands and still doesn't repent, doesn't go back and try to say, hey, you know what, I was wrong here. He doesn't try to make it right. He doesn't appeal to Uriah in any way, shape, or form. He decides to send Uriah back to the battlefield, but he sends him with a letter. In this letter, he says, deliver this directly to Joab. Now, as you know, Joab is already a kind of shaky character. Joab has already, you know, done some really despicable things, and David kind of knows that Joab is the guy to go to for his dirty work or his henchmanism. So, of course, he goes to Joab and says, you know, he gives him this letter. And of course, Uriah is so upright, he's not opening this letter. But he tells Joab through this letter, hey, put Uriah in the front lines and then withdraw back from him so that he's killed in battle. So Joab is like, okay, I'll do your dirty work for you. And he does this thing. Of course, Uriah the Hittite does come to his death. And word is sent back through a messenger by Joab sends a messenger to David and says, hey, this thing is done. And he tells him, listen, tell him all these other things first. And at the very end, slide in there that, by the way, Uriah the Hittite is dead. Well, this servant is like, look, I'm gonna open with that one. So the servant, of course, goes in. Hey, David, Uriah is dead. So David is now thinking, I've gotten away with it. Maybe he's thinking, you know, this is what I'm going to have to do. And so now he goes into the next part of his sinister plan. After killing Uriah the Hittite in battle, he decides, well, now I'm going to try to pretend to be the good guy, and I'm going to take Bathsheba as my wife and raise this child. You know, of course, the townspeople are probably thinking, oh, she's pregnant, her husband Uriah died, you know, this, that, and the third. He's just doing a great thing taking her in. But of course, if you start doing the math, you realize Uriah wasn't home to have sex with his wife to get her pregnant. Therefore, where did this baby come from? So, of course, now you have to kind of go into the deeper part of the plan. You know, Joab, of course, is this sinister character lurking in the shadows. He's of course the head of the military for David, but he's got this way about him that just kind of lends itself to doing the enemy's work. And don't we all have someone in our friendship circle like that? Somebody who is like, you know what? I don't know that they're necessarily here because they're godly or spiritual, but they're definitely down to do some dirt. You know, have we gotten rid of those people in our lives? Absolutely not. If you are David, David kept Joab around. And I don't know if he was listening to the old adage of, you know, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, but it sure seemed that way. You know, he knew Joab was up to no good. You know, Joab had done some pretty shady things in the past. And David's fully aware of this, yet he kept him around. So that kind of leads you to believe that David, he may have had, you know, some use for Joab that, you know, we're not told about. So now you see something in David that he's shifting gears politically. He went from being completely the opposite of his predecessor Saul, and now he's kind of aligned with Saul and many of the things Saul did. And he's actually become sinister, and he's become insensitive to evil. He doesn't even see what he's doing here, or he sees it and he doesn't want to look at it. So now you have a situation where we have to talk about David's flesh. So a note that I wrote here is that in our flesh, we're concerned with pleasing others. In the spirit, we're concerned about pleasing God. And so here's the thing. David's trying to do these things, and he's trying to, you know, pick up all the pieces. And at this point, only he and Bathsheba know what's going on. And he's had the chance to repent, and yet he doesn't. So we're left to wonder, you know, is there something there that we don't know? Is there something there that we're not told? I don't think it's that the case. I think the case is that, you know, this is human nature. We try to hide sin when really we should expose our sin and therefore heal from it. So now David writes a couple of psalms. Now the one that I want to mention here, he mentions Psalm 32, and it's verses 3 through 5. And he talks about being physically ill concerning the sin of adultery. And he talks about how he had not professed his sin and repented, and therefore he was physically ill from it. He was spiritually ill from it. You know, he kind of had this feeling of the Lord departing him. And, you know, it's true. We separate ourselves from God with sin. And so, you know, we need to deal with that. So this is definitely getting to be a juicy, juicy story. You know, if you want to continue watching, I'm going to do a second part to this video. I didn't want it to be too long, but the second part will go into 2 Samuel 12, 1 through 14. So we can kind of talk about what's going to happen and how all this stuff with Uriah and Bathsheba and David has now kind of morphed into something. It's going to be a ball of fire that never goes out in David's household. So please keep watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sorry about the reference. I got it wrong in the last video, but it really is 2 Samuel that we're going through. So I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope you have some insight. Please share your thoughts below in the comment section. If you haven't already subscribed, I'd really, really invite you to go ahead and subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you on the next video. Bye.